Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Return on Character podcast. I've got Walt Rakowich with me today, author, former CEO of a large real estate company, and just a very interesting man that has a lot to bring on the subject of leadership per our focus as a fund. Our fund focuses on allocating capital purely on the basis of our understanding of leadership's character. And so to have an expert in the room with us today is a gift. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us. Well,
Yeah, it's awesome to be with you. Really
yeah.
awesome. Thank you.
Well, I always like for me, when I get to know somebody, it's always nice to start with context. Where you grew up, um, what your childhood was a little bit like, and how you got to where you are today. And then I'd love to transition a little bit into your learnings, which was laid
Mhm.
out in the book that you wrote. So tell us about how you first showed up in the world and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and still am. While I live in Denver, I still am a avid Steeler fan, as you can imagine. And I was the grandson of European immigrants.
Mhm.
I talk a lot about leadership, and we'll chat more about leadership as time goes on. But mine was really molded by so many things, not the least of which that I always like to tell people that I hit the parent lottery. And we didn't have financial wealth, but there was always a wealth of love and support in the room, and that's what I grew up with, and that had a huge influence on me, Dan. I went to college at Penn State University, and then I'm on the board of Penn State today. So
Really,
yeah, it's still with me.
that's
And
amazing.
yeah, and I spent the beginning part of my career with Price Waterhouse. So I was an auditor and a tax person, and then I went to Harvard Business School and kind of learned a little bit about the ropes in B school. Great place to go. And then I decided to go into the real estate business. I took a job in Los Angeles with a company called Trammell Crow Company, very large development firm, and was building warehouses at the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. Really got in that piece of the business, very much a niche business at the time. And after that, I went to work for a startup by the name of Prologis. It wasn't named that at the time, but we changed our name to Prologis.
Uh-huh.
That's the company everybody would know today. And I moved up the ranks there in the company, and ultimately, and we'll get to this story, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
ultimately became the CEO. And throughout my career, I just have become more and more intrigued about what good leadership is. And I retired about 10 years ago, and today I do a number of things around leadership, most of which are centered around really trying to impact others in a positive way. I do that both in the inner city, where the group I'm involved with is trying to lift up the lives of urban youth through character mentoring and leadership development. And I do that in the business community, where I have, as you mentioned, I've written a book on influence. I believe that one of the things we're called to do as leaders is to be influential, and I call it transfluence, which actually in the book stands for transformative influence. And I try to speak into the minds of leaders and other people in the business community through actually shows like this,
Right.
and through my own. I have my own LinkedIn live show called Off the Rack, where I interview leaders as well, and through blogs and through speeches and through those sorts of things. And I keep myself busy doing that. I also sit on 3 corporate boards. I sit on my university board, and I do a number of different things like that as well. So I'm wearing a lot of different hats after retiring as the CEO of a large public company, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, and you forgot to mention your most recent accomplishment, becoming a grandfather.
Oh yeah,
Last
yep, yep. I became a grandfather last week, so
Wow.
it's now I think it's 10 or 11 days in the tooth.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. I love that. Well, You know, one of the things that I listened to some of your podcasts and learned a little bit about your book, and everything really resonated with me. And I was hoping that you could take us through um, some of the key principles. I have roughly 4 or 5 key principles that I took from it, but I know you probably know them by heart. But I would love for you to not just say them, but to give us examples of in your career where you kind of learned that lesson enough to be able to inspire you to actually put it down in a book and give it to the rest of the world. Um, in your first one, your first lesson was trust, that you put forward. Could you just talk to us a little bit about the book? Talk to us about the 4 or 5 key things that you write about, and help us unpack that.
I believe that trust, I like to say, is the currency of business. Um, in my book, I talk about Howard Schultz at Starbucks saying that transparency is the currency of business, and I actually believe that too. But I think transparency is, really is one of the things that creates trust. And I want to talk a little bit about an experience that happened to me that really, I would say, inspired me to write the book. And that experience, when I tell you the experience, I think you'll understand it a little bit more, especially this word trust. Um, so I had plenty of things in my career that influenced the way that I thought about leadership, but the most important thing happened was a challenge that I faced during the financial crisis in 2008. And up until that point, I was the number two person at Prologis. So I was the president, chief operating officer, and I had risen through the ranks as a regional VP, CFO, et cetera.
How big was the
And
company roughly
oh,
at that?
the well, it was a startup company when I joined it in 1994. By the time I became CEO, we had $50 billion in assets.
Okay.
So we were probably, number 200 or 250 or so in the Fortune 500. So
And you were
very large,
publicly listed?
publicly listed company, New York Stock Exchange, still is today. One of the largest companies on the New York Stock Exchange today. But for the first 15 years of the company, we were absolutely a darling on Wall Street. And, we had a sound strategy. We had great people, terrific brand, good board, market leader in our industry, et cetera. And I do believe a lot of that had to do with really good leadership. But then um, we had a change at the top. And I was at that time, I was promoted to president COO, and then I reported to the CEO of the company. And you know, looking back on it, most people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. And I was, as I said, I was the president, my boss was CEO. And I loved the company, but I just couldn't reconcile with him what good leadership meant. I mean, he had just a different view of it. And on the one hand, he was one of the most brilliant people I ever met. And on the other hand, I felt marginalized by his need to look brilliant. And um, many times I didn't feel listened to. Many times I didn't feel trusted. I felt micromanaged. Many times I didn't feel like I agreed with the decisions, but no one was really listening. And most important thing is I wasn't being told the truth. And I could see, we could all see a change in the culture because the whole management team could see it. And we began to act in silos and we didn't communicate as a team. We didn't talk in the open. We made decisions behind closed doors. And frankly, it led to poor investment decisions, very poor in 2006 and 2007. We put way too much debt on our balance sheet against the wishes of our CFO, but because our CEO didn't want to issue any equity at the time. And in the end, at the end of the day, those decisions cost the company dearly. And when the Great Recession hit in 2008, we were ill prepared. And I resigned in January 2008 because I went to the board and I said, look, I cannot work in a management team that doesn't trust itself, if you will, or where we don't trust the CEO is the bottom line. And interestingly enough, our stock was at an all-time high at the time. This is again January 2008. which at the time our market cap was, I don't know, $20 billion, something like that, which equated to a stock price of $72 a share. It hit an all-time high around then. And from the outside looking in, we still look pretty good. But from the inside looking out, we were a disaster waiting to happen. And I didn't know how much of a disaster it would be. Obviously, the S&P 500 was down close to 40% in '08, but our mistakes were manifest themselves in a much greater way. And after I left the company in 10 short months, by November of '08, our stock was down 96%. We were the third worst performing stock in the S&P 500. Stock was at $2.20 a share. Front page article in the Wall Street Journal, we're next. This darling of Wall Street has gone bad. And on November 8th, I got a call from the board of directors, and they said, look, you were right a year ago. We're going to part ways with the CEO. And we'd like you to come back and run the company. And I got to tell you, I knew it would take a Herculean effort. But I agreed to do it because I had hired many of the people that were there. And I could see that they had lost confidence in leadership. And I knew I had a great management team. And, looking back on it, really crucible moments, I think, are the times when we're the strongest and where we have an opportunity to shine, even though the funny thing is you never wish it on anybody, including yourself. But yet, when you look back on it, especially if you succeed, it turns out to be one of the best moments of your life. And over
So
the
what did
next,
you say to your team when you came in and took over? I mean, like
uh,
your stock's in the takes,
yeah,
$2. Everybody thinks their head's on the chopping block. Other firms are falling off the ship, right? Up at the edge of the
yeah,
world. What'd you
yeah.
say?
Great question. I would just tell you that I was never tested more in my life than at that point in time. But I tell you what, I had a great conversation um, with a guy named John Mack, who was the CEO of Morgan Stanley. And, we were one of Morgan Stanley's big clients. So, when the relationship banker called me up and said, hey, by the way, Morgan Stanley was supposedly going bankrupt at that time.
I
Remember,
remember.
Goldman Sachs was going down and
Yeah.
everything was going down, right? And so it was like, he goes, well, I think you and John could kind of have mutual commiseration together, And, but, I said to my banker, I would love to talk to him. Let's set something up. So we get on the line together and, I said, John, I don't want to hear about TARP. I don't want to hear about all the stuff I read in the papers. Whether you're for this stuff, I don't want to hear about the Fed and the Treasury Secretary calling you up. There were a bunch of rumors about putting Morgan Stanley together with JP Morgan, all that stuff. Trust me, only thing I want to talk to you about is how you're dealing with your people right now, because we're in the midst of bankruptcy, supposedly too. And you know what? It was really interesting. And I wrote about this in my book, is he said, Walt, and I asked him, I said, how do you create trust in the organization? Because I think that's the most important thing. And he goes, you're right. And he goes, you know what, Walt? I run Morgan Stanley on the basis of what I call the 3 H's. And now he's got me intrigued. And I said, okay, well, what is that? And he said, my 3 H's, and I believe the best leaders that are out there that create trust in their organizations do it through humility. They do it through honesty. And then he said, in this day and age, a banker needs to have a sense of humor. So he said, walk around with a sense of humor. So, you know what? I thought about that and I thought, wow, that's pretty powerful. But the more I thought about it, like I can make you laugh from time to time and I can put a smile on my face, but actually I don't think I'm really that humorous a person. Okay. Um, but what he was really saying was, when you walk into a room, people have to look at you as somebody that they trust. And in some regard, being, cracking a joke from time to time really lightens up the room. But I think what he really, really meant, when I dug in deep, was this word human, okay, or heart. Leaders that have humanness, heart, right? And part of manifesting that is through humor. And so my three H's became humility, honesty, and heart. Humanity, I would say, underscored that word heart. And I talk a lot about that in the book and what that means. And I will, I'll just tell you a real quick story, then I'll end because I know you have other questions. But people I ask me all the time, well, Walt, how did you turn around the company? I said, well, I didn't turn around the company. People in the organization turned around the company. What does a CEO do? A CEO, yes, he or she has to establish strategy, has to go to the board, has to get buy-in. They have to have some vision. I get all that. But at the end of the day, your job is to be like a cheerleader, or
Right.
your job is to, rile people up, focus them, get them excited, and they will turn the company around. Okay. So, and that's what I was kind of struggling with. But I got to tell you, and I got lots of stories, but I had a coach one time tell me that I basically needed to listen more and, not do as much myself, but just try to listen to people more. Right. And they'll have all the answers. So there we were in a finance meeting, and I'll end.
No. You're doing great. You're kind of
Okay.
answering all the questions for me, making my job easy. I'd keep going. This is a great
I'll end with a
story.
story.
It's a great
So
story.
we're there in a finance meeting. We're late. It's late at night. I'm telling you, it's after midnight. I can't even tell you what time it is, but it's late. And this is about a month after I'd taken it over, just before Christmas. And one of my finance directors looked at me in the room. There was probably 10 or 11 people in the room. And he said, Walt, I got some bad news for you. I said, what's that? He said, I think we're going to blow our bond covenants by the first quarter. We're not going to, i.e., for your listeners, we're not going to hit our earnings, and therefore we're going to fall below what it takes to keep the bonds current. And I said, okay, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, that means the bondholders can foreclose on us, basically, and therefore we're going to have to declare bankruptcy. And I had been working with the company for 15 years. I left, but then I came back. And so I have all this history of this company. I am, all in trying to turn this doggone thing around with my employees. And I just got white as a ghost. Like, I didn't know what to say. And the only thing I said was, I felt like I was going to faint. So I said, guys, do you mind if I just leave the room for a little bit? I need a breath of fresh air. I mean, my face felt cold almost, and so I walked down the hallway, turned, and I saw this chair. I felt like I was going to faint. I saw this chair, so I did as quickly as I could go over to the chair. I try to get there to sit down, and I don't make it. And my head hits on the way down, hits the corner of the desk, splits my head open. And I'm laying there in a pool of blood for what turned out to be about 10 minutes, knocked out. Then I wake up, and the first thing that hits me is, oh my God, all these people are still waiting in the room for me. After I figured out where I was, for about 30 seconds, I had absolutely no idea
You
where I
have
was.
blood all over your face.
Blood on the carpet. And so then I get up, and the pride in me kicks in. I go into the washroom and try to suture it up. There's a huge lump. And I get it to stop bleeding. And I walk into the room. Now it's been 15 or 20 minutes. They're all waiting for me still. And I go, let's talk about this bankruptcy thing. And my CFO looks at me and he said, no, Walt, let's talk about that lump on your head. So ugly. What is that? Right. And I go, well, and I just realized I was busted. I was just completely busted. And I looked around the room and I said, you know what? I said, I was hired to turn this company around. I was hired to have all the answers. But I just realized I don't have any answers. And I'm not going to turn it around without you guys. And I said, the fact of the matter is, you all have the answers. Me. And it was a total vulnerable moment. And the next thing I could hear, and this is after probably 15 seconds, which seemed like eternity, is one of the finance guys said, "Don't worry, Walt, we got your back." And I realized that vulnerability can be an amazingly powerful tool for a leader. You want to create trust? That's how you do it. Now, don't get me wrong, people want to see you lead. Okay, you can't be so meek that people don't respect you, but it is a really uncomfortable thing for leaders. And yet it can be so powerful because it's so human. And it's the ultimate expression of honesty. So, you know, by by the way, by letting your guard down from time to time, you invite other people to do it. And that's where you get real communication. And so I think about people say to me all the time, well, okay, humility, honesty, heart. What does that mean? Well, I can't tell you that if I went through all of the financial things that we did, um, buying back our bonds at 50 cents on the dollar and, renegotiating our covenants with our lenders and doing 3 equity offerings over 3 years for $1 billion a piece, all that stuff. Yeah. Did that help turn around the company? Damn right it did. Okay. But you want to know what really turned around the company? It's episodes like I just talked about, which by the way, became folklore. And people talked about it. You think
Really?
those people in the finance committee meeting, you think they didn't go out and say, "You're not going to believe what happened last night"? They did. And you know what? I was good with that
Yeah.
because I wanted to show people that I had a heart, that I listened, that I cared about communication, that I wasn't the person that was going to turn it around, that they were. There were so many messages that came out of just that one situation, you know, and 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 I think it showed our leadership team also something about what we were going to be. We weren't going to be a leadership team that was untrusted, that lied, that we were going to be a leadership team that was something totally different, and we needed to make sure our employees understood that. Does that make sense?
Totally. Well, the other thing that kind of strikes me is that and I may have this wrong, but it sounds like it's like the first crucible of the company, right? You started off, you grew steadily, consistently, probably had some challenges, but this was a real live or die moment, which I would imagine bonded you and the team and reshaped the culture in a certain way. The fact that you got through it.
Dan, absolutely. And I can tell you the interesting thing was those same finance people went back to work with the CFO, and they ultimately came up with a solution that was brilliant. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. And we ended up um, selling our entire China operation, and we sold about a half of our operation in Japan. When we sold half our operation in Japan, we were able to book a $300 million gain. It was a book gain, but that book gain bought us time to, in essence, not blow our covenants,
Right.
and it actually bought us 4 quarters to then, because now bondholders don't have you in that position. Now they have to negotiate with you because you booked this $300 million gain, and that gain lasts for 4 quarters
Uh-huh.
because it's always a 4 quarter look back on your covenant calculations. Does
Uh-huh.
that make sense?
Yeah.
It was brilliant, and it bought us some time to go and negotiate our covenants. And I didn't come up with my point is, I didn't come up with that. My people came up with that. Our people came up with that, right? And why? Because they were empowered to. I mean, they were empowered to come up with it, right? They knew they had to. The gun was to their head. Right? But that's what I think. I think that's what good leadership is. And too many times leaders feel like they got to be the solution. They don't have to be the solution. They have to be the visionary in some respects. They have to point their people in the right direction, but their people have to trust them. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of building trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's exactly what we look for in all our CEOs and leadership teams is if we could get behind the curtain and learn those kinds of stories, we'd be long here. companies like yours all day long because we believe it creates an enduring firm, not just a firm that's trying to meet an exit or meet a quarter, but trying to create a culture that lasts beyond them in many ways.
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, I love that. That's such a great story. So out of that, I think we'd be remiss not to follow the story to its end, because it's, you're in the trenches, come up with a solution with your team. What happens from there on out? You mentioned in your book core values, uh, attaching meaning to the company, and what you do every day. Tell us a little bit how you did that, and then eventually, what the company did.
These days, people will probably laugh at this because of everything written about ESG and the like. But back then, there weren't a lot of companies that were giving back. I mean, they did in a periphery way, I guess. But um, I really felt that we were in a position where our employees were sort of had a little bit, and especially in the beginning, had a little bit of a woe is me kind of attitude, which is to say, I'm working for this company that is on the verge of bankruptcy. Are we going to make it? Oh my goodness.
Right.
And that tends to be it's an insular way of looking at things. And when I wrote the book Transfluence, I wrote about the most important thing that I think a leader can bring to the table is transformational influence, meaning that um, the world is not about you. It is about the influence that you can have on other people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not just about the CEO. If everybody has that attitude, if everybody comes to work with the attitude that it's not about me, it's about how I can influence not only people around me, but people in my community, then you get out of your own shadow. And I talk a lot in the book about pride and fear. I think pride and fear are two of the biggest leadership blockers or influential or blockers, if you will, to your leadership journey that you can have. Why? Because both pride and fear in general have people looking at themselves. Like, I'm either really fearful about this or I'm really prideful, we're the best and this and that. And I think if you can get out of that, you get out of your own way, you start focusing on other people, um, then I think you can be wildly influential and I think you can be wildly successful.
How'd
And
you
so,
change that within your culture then? How do you do
well,
that? I
I
can see
think
within yourself, but how do you do it in an entire culture?
you do it by providing opportunities for your people to do things outside of themselves. And we created a number of those opportunities. I mean, we in fact we didn't we were this close to making it mandatory, but we did. But when we get in front, well, first of all, little things like our town hall meetings. Our town hall meetings were devoted, one third of our town hall meetings were devoted to the things that we did outside of Prologis, the difference that we were making in various communities throughout the world. And we were in over 100 cities globally.
Right.
So we're all throughout Europe, all throughout Asia. I can remember my first time I went to Japan and I said to my leaders in Japan, I said, listen, I want you guys to be giving outside. I mean, I want you to, pour into your community. And the person in Japan said, oh, we don't do that in Japan. I said, well, what do you mean, Mike? His name's Miki, but Mike. I said, what do you mean, Mike? He said, Japanese, um, don't do those things in the community. And he started to explain to me that culturally, um, that it's different in Japan. They don't somebody if somebody's hurting, someone's homeless or something. You don't normally see that in Japan.
Right.
There's so much pride there, and somebody would not let themselves ever get to that, and so therefore, you don't. It's not something that a business would do to help that. I said, okay, well, what is important to you, Mike? And he said, Japanese are very clean people. I said, you're right. And I said, how about the communities that we're in? And he said, well, not all communities are as clean as they could be. And I said, well, okay, well, why don't we have a monthly cleanup day. We go to the communities that we're in and just clean up their city, and don't ask any questions. Just tell them we're coming to clean up, and do it every month. He said, my employees would love that. Japan and in France, they said, we don't, the government takes care of everybody. We pay 70% taxes. The government takes care of everybody. We're not going to give anything to everybody. I said, okay, what would be kind of cool from your perspective? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, what about bike races? Like you guys have the Tour de France. Isn't that a big deal? He said, yeah, that's a big deal. I said, why don't you guys put together a bike race and raise money, and then you just give it wherever you want to give it. I don't care. It doesn't need to be a charity. It could be an old folks home. I don't really care. Whatever, but give it someplace. He's like, okay. Well, they started this race where they go from Marseille all the way up to Paris, and I think they're still doing it today. And they raise all this money. It's just amazing. And you know what? Their hearts are in it. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like, you got to get out of your own way. And you got to, as a leader, you got to emphasize the importance of that. And then in your town hall meetings, you spend a third of your time talking about it. Yeah, you talk about your earnings, and yeah, you talk about what you could do better, but let's also talk about the things that we can do in this world that are outside of ourselves. Let's emphasize it, right? So, and that's just one example. But I think that's what leadership is all about. That is, in my opinion, you ask, that's how you make a transformative influence on people. That's how you get them to get out of their own way and not focus on themselves as much.
Yeah, I love that story. And it's so consequential because it's not just here in America. It's beyond, and coming up with various different types of solutions in different cultural contexts to
Yes.
tap the same part of the heart that
Yes.
is so important.
It's
Uh,
there. It's there for all of us. It's just a little different.
it's in the research that we base our um, analysis on. It, they identified four characteristics of character: integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion. And what they found in the research is that those four characteristics are also found in every culture around the world. When they say character, when the definition of character comes up, those are the four characteristics that are to ring true, cross culturally, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a universal understanding.
Yeah.
And, and then they happen to be also characteristics that have now been proven to correlate to success um, within organizations. Tell us about, finish the story. How did you, okay, you're changing culture, you're solving earth shattering problems with your team. Where did it end up? How did you get, and how long did you stay?
I did it for 4 years. And I have to admit, um, I was tired,
Yeah, for sure.
and I was really tired. Now, this is a company that, my average year was 300,000 miles in an airplane.
Yeah.
It's 6 trips to Europe, 4 trips to China, 3 trips a year to Japan, a couple trips to Australia. That's not even counting Mexico and then New York and San Francisco. And so I was always on the road. And I woke up one day and I just said, this is a young man's game. And I was only 55, so I get criticized a lot for retiring too early. Um, but I really, really wanted to move on. And I had, I had spent some time. I've talked earlier with Bob Buford, who wrote Halftime, and I just felt like it was my halftime. I felt like, honestly, I wanted to do something different. I had been in the industry itself for 30 years, and I wanted to give back in the world in a different way. I just did, and part of it was just feeling tired.
And Walt, I'm going to stop you here. So you left us at $2 a share. Where
Oh
did you
yeah.
end up at the end? When you
Well,
retired?
we had diluted the shareholders, so it became it's sort of the best way of looking at it would be the $72 a share the best thing we could get to. It's synonymous to getting back to 72 was
Uh-huh.
getting back to 30. Does that make
Yep.
sense?
Yep.
Going from 2 to 30. So, and we ended up merging our company together with another company, A and B, and they took the name Prologis. I retired. The CEO of A and B took over. That stock today is trading at about $130 a share.
Well,
Um, they have $150 billion in assets, one of the largest companies in the S&P 500. Hamid, who's the chairman and CEO, likes to say that he believes that 3% of all global GDP moves through a Prologis warehouse, which is just amazing, stunning
unbelievable.
statistic. Um,
Unbelievable.
they have an incredible footprint. So yeah, I mean, it's
Well,
just an amazing story. And
congratulations to you and your team. But okay, so you're back at halftime. You meet up with Bob, the infamous legend who changes the course of many uh, of uh, of leaders. Tell us where you ended up going.
what I did was the day I left, I started on 3 corporate boards. When CEOs of public companies retire, that's the first place that they end up going, which is nice because you spend a part of your time doing it. But at the end of the day, I really wanted to give back. As I mentioned in the beginning, I chair the board and I spend a tremendous amount of time with an organization here in Denver that mentors children in the inner city, urban youth, about what character and leadership is all about. And we started a national organization, and now we're in 15 cities throughout the United States under the name of Elevate USA. You can look that up. Um, as you know, I wrote a book, I speak, I'm on podcasts, and what I really try to do is I like to speak into the minds of next gen leaders about what real leadership is all about, in my opinion. And I think there's too much emphasis given to monetary things. Don't get me wrong; we all have to be profitable. If we're not profitable, we're not viewed in the eyes of people as successful. But I think there's a lot of paths to heaven, if you will, and if you look at profitability as heaven, and I just think that people need to understand that leading companies with a heart, creating trust, and the various things that we just talked about is very important. And any leader can do it. And I just want people to know that you can be successful. In some respects, having a turnaround story allows me to do that.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah,
so I tell the story today.
I love it, and I'm so grateful for you, and I'm so grateful for your example. Um, and I'm thrilled to have had the chance to hear it, and much less be able to share it. And obviously, you're kind of a guy that's championing the same direction that we're championing here at Rock Investments. And it's great to collaborate with you in that effort. And I also too believe that it's more important than returns as character, but I think they follow and they correlate with one another. So again,
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Walt, for being with us.
You're so welcome. It's absolutely my pleasure, Dan. Thank you.